Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to continue with Thus Have I Seen. I was with Venerable last week, so I wasn't able to be here, but I got an update. But before I continue with our reading, I want to just acknowledge how wonderful it was to have all of our Sangha together Sunday to celebrate the ordination of our Dharmacharyas, of which we have two here, Dina and Elsie. And thank you. And how special that day was, and still is, because they don't just stop learning on that day that they get their certificate. And the fact that our Sangha is developing and growing together is really quite fabulous. The theme of the retreat for the Dharmacharyas was Phoenix and the Chicken, which is part of what we're reading. And that theme carried through the retreat. And on Santi, was it Thursday that we began the development, the creative development? Yeah. Can you just speak a little bit to that? We need I think, and the reason I'm bringing this up, because it's part of what we're learning here, the development of our learning here.
Yeah, so I didn't know what it was going to be. And Soma and Venerable called me at like 11 o'clock the night before I think it started, the retreat started. And an idea had surfaced. And I think it was enough of an idea that Venerable was ready to bring me into the conversation. And so they called me, and, all I heard was like, started off as like a rubber chicken as a joke. And then they were looking on Etsy for full chicken costumes. And then that took them down the road of finding a Phoenix costume. It was just really beautiful. And so they just sent me links. They didn't say much, just sent me links first. And then I opened, I'm like, okay, And there wasn't much that I think that was known, but there was enough that was felt, that this was enough information. And then when looking at the costumes, we talked a little bit more, and then the idea came out of, a chicken is a chicken because of the way they think of themselves. A phoenix is a phoenix because of the way they think of themselves. And so essentially we kind of had a loose idea of what this might be. And then on Thursday, I met with the Dharmacharyas, and I gave a talk, I think that morning or something, on the Phoenix and the Chicken, and the 5 Vidyas, just letting what I knew be enough, and just taking what feels like a kernel and like widening that, I gave this talk that I really feel like I know this much, but I have enough of a felt sense. I have enough of I've seen enough that I could take that one thing and just widen it. And suddenly I realized there was much more within me than I realized. I didn't know a lot, but there was a lot more in me is what I was experiencing.
Just pause for a second. Think about that. Think about that process, what you've just heard so far. Where it started, the book, the retreat, the conversation, the call, the pictures.
Yeah.
Just think about that for yourself. Think about how you are, for good, for worse. So just be with that right now. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. And so when I started talking to the retreatants about it, they got real up in arms, some of them, about the time restraint, because we were creating a whole visual, like music video, within like 2.5 days. And
not full days.
Not full days, just like little chunks of time here and there. And I just said to them, something will happen. Something will happen. Something always does, something always shakes out. And what I find is the more that we're open to what might be able to happen versus going out trying to make a thing happen, or operating from the idea of lack. I wish I had more time. I wish I had more materials. If we just stick with what we have, then within that, there's like endless possibilities, really. It becomes, what do we just want to do? Like, what's the choice we want to make as a collective? Because we could do endless things together. And that's really how this whole process continued to move forward, is we worked with what we had, the skills that were there, the people that were there, the things that presented themselves. And within 2.5 days, we had like a group come together and create a whole visual story. We had people come together and create a shot list, so we knew exactly what shots we needed to get in the 2.5 hours that we filmed. We had a costume group that pulled together a costume within hours, literally hours, just a few hours. And then we had an editing team that came together and did their first draft one night. I gave some feedback, and then they came back with another draft that felt like they had worked an extra like 10 hours, but it was because there was a collective mindset that made it feel like it was a long time, but it was just because so many people involved themselves in the process. And then we had some runners and people who, everyone came together and stepped in as they could with what they had in the time we had. And so within that space, we got to create something really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I think we all had our like chicken phoenix moments throughout it. And yeah, it was wonderful. Mm-hmm. It was wonderful. Yeah, I can do that actually. Yeah, we can show that today.
That was actually going to be my next question. If not today, maybe next week.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's think about that for a minute. Think about how that process, that way of being unfolds for you, and where you divert at certain points out of fear, out of not knowing, out of desire. Talked about during that time, we talked about the role. If your tendency is to take charge and roll, maybe step back. If your tendency is to step back, maybe step in. And listening and listening and sharing and listening. It was incredible to watch for all of us. We all had our moments. And I want to continue to bring this experience for those of you that were there, and for those of you that got to be part of it through the Zoom conversations. But think of it as we go through today. Think about how, as we read some of what we read in Master's book, what might come up, and just be with it. And let it settle and just be curious. I wonder what that is. I feel it big, or I feel it small, but it's a gnawing thing. A big piece that Santi didn't use this word, but totally existed throughout the time, was trust. Trust within and trust with the cohort, with the people I was with. I saw it over and over and over. I certainly experienced that here with my monastic brothers and sisters, but also with all of us, that we've created this place in time with our Heartwood family. And it's been with all of you participating, engaging, being part of, listening, sharing. And so I say this a lot, but I'll invite us to go to essence when we share out. Just the key points of what's coming up. Key points. So that we can really expand our learning today and beyond. So I wasn't surprised when Busita and Santi said they only got to page 30 last week. I texted, where are you? Oh, before I go there, Venerable, I just spoke with her right before I came in. She's rested. She sounds clear. She's, I think I'm turning a corner. And I said, I don't think you're turning a corner. I think you are turning a corner. There's no thinking here. We're watching this, and it's a slow process, bit by bit, bit by bit. And it's pretty wonderful to watch. And it's a great lesson. Much as Panyadeepa gave us lessons always, but through the last weeks of his time with us, we got to have that as well. So I went back to chapter 1. And the name of the chapter is, How Did I Get Here? Now ask yourself that. How did I get here? We all have our stories, how we landed here at Heartwood. I often share how I landed with Panyawati, is I happened to be picking up Tricycle magazine one day, and there was an article on this Buddhist black nun. And I thought, that's interesting. And I read it. I thought, wow, that's amazing. And 4 days later, or maybe a week later, I drove up to Seattle to visit a friend who's Buddhist and said, there's a new teacher that's new to me that's going to be speaking. And this was 8 years ago, I think now. And I'm wondering, it's Friday night, you want to listen? I said, sure. I said, who is it? And she said, Venerable Panyawati. I said, wait, what? I just read this article on her. Zzz, right? So we went, and for months, I've been looking at a way I could do service work in India. And I knew I didn't want to travel on my own. And I was looking for groups that were going, and nothing felt right. So we traveled across Seattle, which was always harrowing to me, getting to the talk, and Venerable did what Venerable does. And I thought, wow, she's really something. And I got up to leave, and people swarm her. So she was busy. I didn't have a need to talk with her or say anything to her. So I was walking out the door. There's a side table, and I went over and looked, picked up this card. It said, Embracing Simplicity, Service Work in India. And I looked, and I turned around to say something to her. She was standing right there in front of me. And she was just sitting on the cushion, and I said, I'm interested in going with you to doing this work. And she said, and I'm interested in working with you. How did I get here? Right? All of us have our stories. How did I get here? But here in Hendersonville and here in the world. How did I get here? And from that, how do I get to where I am today? Bits and pieces have contributed to getting here. So Master Zazi starts with talking about how she got here, meaning how she got to where she is today with Buddha Master. And I just want to highlight a couple of things just for my own benefit, because of last week, I haven't really had a chance to review where we are. But if you have a book, on page 29 at the top, she's talking about how she got to be with Buddha Master. However, now I understand why Buddhists are not usually interested in going to any of these. Oh, wait a minute, that's not going to help us. She's talking about having been a Christian. Actually, it was very interesting because, like her, she thought she wanted to be a Lutheran minister. I grew up Lutheran, and I thought I wanted to be a Lutheran minister, and women weren't invited into the seminary at that time like her. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? We both have very much the same trajectory in our spiritual realm. I received my early Christian training and learned the Lutheran catechism under, she mentioned, he told me that it was, the Bible says, in my Father's house are many mansions, meaning that the heavens were not just filled with Christians, or more probably, he had taught me, were not filled with just Lutherans. There were people in heaven from all sorts of religious faiths and backgrounds. In fact, there are many different types and levels of the heavenly realms to meet the karmic conditions of different types of beings. However, now I understand why Buddhists are not usually interested in going to any of these many heavens as an end goal. They do exist and are a sort of reward for good life on this earth, but they are still part of samsara and thus ultimately subject to reincarnation in the cycle of birth and death, all the suffering that is associated with samsara. Got that? We're sitting with it. And I dropped down to the very last sentence on that last paragraph, and I underlined it twice. All things are impermanent and subject to change. All things. All things. This moment has just passed. It's a new moment. Now this moment has just passed and it's a new moment. Right? So it's so important to be right here, right now. She goes on to say, my karmic conditions were beginning to ripen in as much as I started to yearn for something more. So pay attention to that. How did that come about for you? Where in your spiritual life did you start? And what rolled through in time after time to get you to where you are now? When I was in the Buddhist chaplaincy program down at Upaya, Santa Fe, we had to do a graphic of our spiritual journey. And people were so creative in what they did. It didn't have to be a linear thing and a story. It was developed through creativity. And one person took a wheel of a bicycle tire and had the spokes that really indicated their way. It wasn't linear. It wasn't this, it wasn't this. It had spokes coming out. And from the spokes were little cards that hung low and described the experiences. And for me, I had a goddaughter who was into paper folding. She was in a Japanese immersion program in school. And I she helped me. She was 8 at the time. She was a great teacher. So she helped me fold these papers into a book. And so when you opened it, it became this. And it was such an amazing experience to look at where I started as a young child and what took place. And it wasn't just in church. It was camps. It was people in my life's teachers, where we would go, my family eventually, to go to a lake. That was part of my spiritual journey, the lake and the woods around it, the forest around it. So your spiritual journey, take some time to really look at that. You know, Joe, I know you've mentioned some of that. I mean, it's just really, and see where it's taken you. What parts do you still hold? What parts do you still hold? She goes on to talk about how some of her more universal and experiential pieces from the East in her studies. Spirits are, after all, merely members of the ghost realm. And although some ghosts may have greater supernatural powers than we do, they are still not enlightened beings. So she goes on to describe for us the realms and how we fit in, or not aware of how we fit in. So give that some consideration. spend some time looking at that and then stop and ponder. What about me? What about me? What about my experience? Just this morning, we were doing the breath work with Adrigan, and I had, that just really getting in touch with my breath after a long time of not, breathing up here and not down here, even though I'm aware of that. And I had an experience of just sort of light as we meditated and just being so, wow, and then for a moment, are you creating this in your head? Well, maybe, but then I had, a form. And sometimes we think about this when we have dreams, and is this a daydream or is this trying to explain it out? So I just relaxed into it. And there was this, what felt like, it sort of looked like in my mind's eye, a white, Kuan Yin. I think I had a visit with Kuan Yin. And she just, I don't know, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was. But allowing ourselves, as she did, as she describes in chapter 1, to be able to be with whatever we see, whatever we hear, whatever we experience. Step into it. I don't know that I can do that. Well, just step in. We do some breath holding. And Adrigan says, well, just when you think, I think you see your reptilian brain says, you got to take a breath, give it 5 more seconds. And I say that's a great way to do our world. Just when you think I can't deal with this person anymore, just take a moment and give it 5 more seconds. And then you may or may not want to say anything, but give it 5 more seconds. I've shared when I was working in the schools, I would get constant people in the hallway. So, can you see so-and-so? Can you do this? Can you see? And I started taking a paper and writing things down so that I wouldn't forget. And then during a staff meeting, I said, I'm inviting us all to do the following. When you see me or anyone else in the hallway, stop and count to 5. And then let's exchange. Tell me what you need or want. And 9 times out of 10, not only did the tenor of that exchange happen, but what they needed to say or what they wanted was different, or they would say, you know what? Nothing. Right? So as things come up, as we walk into the world, as we, are in the car, or as we're going to the grocery store, as things come up, give yourself 5 seconds before you blast that horn. Tell them, let's go. It's yellow, soon it'll be green. Or when someone's going slow and you want to pass them, and that passing lane is coming up down the road, and hardly wait to get around them, and just give it 5 more seconds. Just 5 more seconds. And then maybe just a couple more for good measure. Perhaps gaining the insight into the true nature of how things are is not as rare, but being able to understand what is happening and abide in such a state is certainly not possible for most people. It is only through learning and practicing the correct Buddha Dharma that one can obtain and abide in such holy states. How can people who have ever heard of Buddhism experience such states, if even only momentarily? I can only think that this is the maturing of good karma earned in previous lives. The Buddha Master often talks about being a causal bodhisattva. I think that means that at a given moment, you have created the causes to be a bodhisattva. The transformation can be that immediate. However, most of us do not have the training, discipline, and ability to stay in that state. You merely get a glimpse of that. You merely get a glimpse of what this wondrous state is like, but you may never be the same. May never be the same. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing. And without saying, I was a bodhisattva this moment. I used to, well, I still do, I guess. Sometimes when something happens, I'll say to Bodhisattva, something strong like bull. Bodhisattva. And maybe, just maybe, we can just acknowledge the feelings of a bodhisattva. Now, we didn't get through, not even got close to getting through the Way of the Bodhisattva book, but it's worth continuing. It's such great information, such good practice. This is on page 31 if you've got a book. I'm in the middle of the page. The last, she talks about light beings coming to her. She said, the last time these light beings came, I was staying at San Francisco Zen Center and was clearly told that they were finished, and now I was on my own to continue my work. They would not be back, and they have not been. Not remembering anything about these sorts of experiences from my past lives, I wanted to share the experience with everyone. I did not know that you do not do this. I did not know that you do not do this. You do not tell others about supernormal states and experiences for many reasons. One is that they will not believe you and think you most strange or even crazy. Some may even think you to be an alien. I could understand that. I remember a comment made by someone criticizing what I had said about my guru, that I must have been off my meds. I know I run that risk in writing this book and describing my experiences. I could not believe what had happened, and I had experienced it. How could I expect someone else to believe me? Another reason is that other people will cause you to doubt what happened. The shamans warn that evil sorcerers or demons will steal your powers or try to, and there's always the risk of generating pride and self-attachment. We have that risk all the time. All the time. The risk of generating pride and self-attachment. I love your nodding, Sue. Yep. But by studying this sort of thing under my Buddha master, the great Holy Dorje Chang Buddha III, I now know that it is just not in accord with the principles of the Buddha Dharma. So I want to continue reading this, and I'm going to invite Busita, you've got a book, and Santa, you have a book, or you don't? Okay, so Busita, we're going to partner up today, okay? So do you know where I am? Does anybody know where I am? That's the ultimate question, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
But by studying this sort of thing under my Buddha master, the great holy Dorje Chang Buddha III, I now know that it is just not in accord with the principles of the Buddha Dharma. In Buddhism, you must be very careful not to do, say, or think negative things that will generate negative karma. And you must also not do anything that will cause others to do so either. Those who have not had such experiences may generate negative responses, either doubting their own worth because they have never experienced such states, or they may become jealous and envy you because of your experiences. They may want to discredit you or harm you to make themselves feel more secure. I understand that.
Continue.
How can I talk about my supernormal experiences in this book? I am doing so to help others have faith in the powers of the Buddha Dharma and know that there is another world or realm that is much different from what we normally experience, and that we can access that world. Because of this, my Buddha master has often told me that I could tell my story so that others may also believe and develop faith in the true Buddha Dharma. I humbly pray that any merit that I may have received from these events may be shared with all living beings, including those who may malign me.
Thank you. For just a second, I humbly pray that any merit that I may have received from these events may be shared with all living beings, including those who may malign me. So it's sometimes what we share, and often and most always how we share. How we share. Of any sort, really. But she's beginning to give us instruction on how to be with this material, how to step into the Buddha Dharma, how to experience it bit by bit, bit by bit. And there's no real clear direction in the sense of you all will follow this way, this time, and this much, right? It's how we process. We're all different. And so it might take you a while, just like with the practices that we're doing. I don't know. I'm still in part 1. I may never get to part 2. I'm in part 1 and part 2, but now I got to go back to part 1. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's probably real healthy. Now I'm in part 2. I'm feeling really settled. I'm ready to move on. I pay attention to our learning and our growth. The beauty about being in our Sangha is we get to talk about that if we desire or need. I searched for answers in many of the traditional world religions that would explain what I was experiencing. I converted to Judaism when I married my second husband. The rabbi who I then studied with was helpful. I became active in the Church of Religious Science and the Unitarian Universalist Church and studied yoga with a disciple of the great Swami Yogananda. I had many, many questions. I even went back to my Native American roots to gain an understanding of what was happening to me. Although the religious leaders and medicine men or shamans to whom I told of my experiences were very understanding, they could not help me or explain why I had these experiences. I was having periods of extraordinary insight and bliss, but the rest of my life seemed to be unraveling and coming apart. I was drinking and compulsively engaged in my work and other unwholesome activities while still trying to practice Zen Buddhism. It almost killed me. I could not reconcile what was happening in my inner state with what I was doing in my outer life. I could not reconcile what was happening in my inner state with what I was doing in my outer life. This struggle has continued even as I found the answers I sought. Knowing or finding the truth was one thing. Actually doing what was correct was another matter. It's a lifetime event. It's a lifetime event. That is so important. If you get the book, if you got the book, start that one. You have a book? Yeah. Would you read today? Yeah. Okay, we'll share. So I really want us to think about that for just a few minutes. This struggle has continued even as I found the answers I sought. So that says to me, you're never really there. I'm never really there. Because I remember a couple of Sundays ago, Paniwadi talked about, and then there's the next step. And then there's the next step. So I've got this, or not. And that's where maybe we step back and then go forward again. Nothing wrong with 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Okay. Sue, will you begin with I had at the bottom of 32?
I had begun my spiritual quest to seek an end to the suffering that I was experiencing and saw in others, but I could not find any answers. Someone told me that only within the correct Buddha Dharma would I find the answers I was looking for. This proved to be true, but where would I find it?
Keep going.
On a business trip to Asia while working for the Bank of America, I had found the path of the Buddha in the ancient and magnificent temples of Kyoto and began my search for a master who practiced and taught the true Buddha Dharma of Shakyamuni Buddha. Thank you. I became convinced this was the only system that worked. At least it had worked in earlier times. But what I found seemed so different from when Shakyamuni Buddha taught the Dharma. I sat with Jack Cornfield and other Theravada practitioners in Marin County and with Zen masters in San Francisco and Berkeley. And in 1985, I took refuge and received my first Buddhist precepts from Rashi Jinyu Kennett at Shasta Abbey in Northern California. In 1987, I left my job in international banking with full intention to become a nun. I practiced at many monasteries in America and in Japan with several wonderful Japanese, Korean, and American masters. However, no matter how hard I tried to practice within these traditions, I could not find what I was looking for or the answers to my questions.
Thanks. Have you ever had that experience? I could not find what I was looking for or the answers to my questions. And that says a number of things to me. It says, what are you looking for? And if we're looking for this pen out here versus something that's far greater that I can't even define, those are two different things. And that only takes going in and checking in and being with what's really going on here. What's really going on? I certainly had the very same experience in terms of, I was a Lutheran, and then I went to a couple different churches when I went to college, and I left the Christian church, and then I have a great grandmother who's Native American, and so I really wanted to understand my ancestors and studied Native American. And then I went to Alaska and was with a Native Indigenous group up there. And then I went to Hawaii, and wow, that was a totally different experience, like out of this world experience of the Hawaiian culture, the Hawaiian spirituality. And living in Hawaii is like being in 9 different countries. There's Filipinos and Samoans and Japanese. And there was this, I was on the campus, and I was one of maybe 3 white women in the program. I learned a lot and really got into meditation, but it was a different kind of meditation. And then I came to Portland and was part of an ashram for a while and did, I would call temple hopping. But I kept going back to the ashram. I kept going back, and there they practiced both Tibetan and Hindu practices and got to really experience that. And then I went down and did Zen. And all this wasn't separate, compartmentalized experiences. They were all part of the whole. They informed everything about my spiritual world and me. And still, I didn't really go in. I was still out here. And part of that was driven by my work, my job, and my upbringing. So I knew there was something there, but I was all out here. So look at that for yourself. Mark where you are. And take, not that you have to spend time and stuck back there, but just honor those places that informs who you are today. Maybe you two could
sit beside each other.
Yes. You could stay there too.
Zen Buddhism gave me glimpses of the Dharmakaya state through meditation practice but it did not help me with my self-cultivation to become a holy person. I learned from my Buddha master that training the mind was not enough. You had to train all aspects of your life to be able to become truly enlightened. Your 3 karmas, your actions, speech, and thoughts, had to become like a holy person for you to become a holy person. You needed to transform your worldly consciousnesses into the transcendental wisdom of a Buddha. You had to cultivate all 3 bodies of a Buddha, the Nirmanakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Dharmakaya. Most of what I knew and read about Buddhism was merely so-called popular Buddhism that was helpful and nice, but I did not think it was the essence of what Shakyamuni Buddha had taught. I found that this was so. The supreme and unsurpassable Mahamudra of liberation, which I will discuss later, contains specific and detailed instructions on how to do this cultivation, transforming your mindset into action. It teaches you how to practice enlightenment based on truly great compassion and the correct timing of this activity in relationship to your meditation. For example, you will not be able to realize the Nirmanakaya and Sambhogakaya that you must have to become a Buddha if you practice entering emptiness prematurely. Accomplishment in the Dharma depends on very careful attention to these things. These are teachings that I had never even heard of in my years of Zen practice. Zen and other meditative techniques may be good for certain phases in your development, but they are just not complete. I know that one of my students, who was a former serious Zen practitioner for years, came to this practice because she realized that the self-cultivation aspect of Zen practice was missing. One needs to develop one's morality, concentration, and wisdom, and do so in the proper sequence for this practice to become effective.
We'll stop there for just a second or longer. Most of what I knew and read about Buddhism was merely called popular Buddhism that was helpful and nice, but I did not think it was the essence of what Shakyamuni Buddha had taught. I found that this was so. So she's not saying that it's not important, but she's saying, I found that there was something beyond that. Something beyond that. And isn't that wonderful to really think about that this isn't just this, that what I'm doing and living and being isn't just this, it's maybe this. And maybe it's not just this, maybe it's this. And maybe if it's not just this, maybe it's this. That we really become expansive in our understanding and give ourselves permission to just open up just a little bit. And maybe just a little bit more. And maybe just a little bit more. Many of us have talked about how, well, just last night, Santi and Busiti and I were talking about how, just think about a year ago where we were. And we all had this kind of gleeful remembering for a second. We didn't stay there because we are here now. But it was just like, oh, wow. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Look at how far we've come. And I really invite you to do that with yourself in your spiritual practice, but in your life practice. It's all Buddha Dharma. It's worldly Dharma, all worldly Dharma is Buddha Dharma. The supreme and unsurpassable Mahamudra of liberation, the practice that we have stepped into. I just want to go through this couple of lines. Contains specific and detailed instructions on how to do this cultivation, transforming your mindset into action. our mind into action, stepping out. We've been talking about this for weeks, about how we get off the cushion and into the world, how you're in the tennis court, how, wherever you are, there you are, right? But where does it show up? And how do you know you're there in that moment? How does it show up for you? It teaches you how to practice enlightenment based on truly great compassion and the correct timing of this activity in relationship to your meditation. So it's not either or. It's all of it, all the time. Who says that? Panyadeep. For example, you will not be able to realize the Dharmacharyas, Sambodhakaya, that you must have to become a Buddha if you practice entering. Did I say that right? For example, you will not be able to realize the Dharmacharyas and Sambodhakaya that you must have to become a Buddha if you practice entering emptiness prematurely. Accomplishment in the Dharma depends on very careful attention to these things. These are teachings that I'd never even heard of in my years of Zen practice. And then this really stood out for me again, a double line that says something big for me when I double line something. Zen and other meditative techniques may be good for certain phases in your development, but they are just not complete. So just be open to that possibility, that there's so much more than what I've already understood. So much more than I've already understood. One needs to develop one's morality, concentration, and wisdom. Where does that come from? Where do we read about that? Where do we learn about morality, concentration, and wisdom? What is cultivation? It really speaks to that. And don't we think that's a great idea? To develop morality, concentration, and wisdom? And to do that in a sequence in practice to become more effective. So just like cooking, and Paniwadi talks about this, you go in the kitchen and there's typically a sequence. For a while when I was in Portland and I was working a lot, my brother and sister-in-law told me that they were ordering Blue Apron. This is not an advertisement, but an experience. And I got it, and I love to cook, but I just didn't have time. And so I wasn't eating, or I wasn't eating well. I had popcorn for dinner. That's not really so good. So I got Blue Apron, and it was so great. It came in a box, and there's all these cute little things and instructions. So I looked at pictures. It was great. So this will be fun. I was excited. And so it was, I got home, it was 6:30. I was hungry. So I thought, I'll do this. And they tell you what to do, when to do it. And the first thing is to chop everything. And I thought, in all my lack of wisdom, I'll just start because I'm hungry and I want to hurry up the process. So I started chopping, and then I thought, okay, I'll start cooking that. And then I do this and reading. And also, I have to throw in the next item. And it was still sitting there in its wholeness. And meanwhile, everything else was waiting for this item. And I really, really messed it up. I ate it. But the next time I made that, what did I do? Chopped everything first, which is what they said. Chop everything out. And then I followed the instructions. And that time, it was really good. Now I like to cook and just throw things in, and usually it tastes pretty good, but there's some reason for following the directions sometimes. Right? And I think that's what she's talking. I know that's what she's talking about. That's what she's talking about. Can you continue that last sentence on 33, last of 33? Here I am, on to the next page.
Here I am referring to Zen as taught in the modern Zen schools and not Zen as a state of mind that is common to all forms of Buddhism and many other religions, including in the teachings of His Holiness Dorji Chang Buddha III. Zen is a Japanese term, but is transliterated from the Chinese Chan or Chan, which in turn came from Chana, which was the Chinese transliteration of the Sanskrit dhyana. Dhyana, or its Pali equivalent of jhana, was a term for training the mind or meditation. A good friend and Zen priest at the San Francisco Zen Center suggested I become a shaman and learn how to journey to different realms and meet spiritual guides in these places, which I did. He knew I had many questions and that I had not met anyone who could answer my questions. Once, while traveling in the upper realms, I did encounter the same phenomena of the great white light beings with their sparkling jewels, but I was not able to enter the light or experience the bliss as before when they visited me. I could see and momentarily experience higher states of consciousness, but not stay or abide in those places. I was still a long way from my goal. I am grateful that I did that shamanic work. I doubt if I would have been prepared for many of the experiences I have had following my Buddha master if I had not been made aware of other dimensions and worlds beyond what we think of as ordinary reality.
So what's the name of this chapter? How did I get here? She's laying it out pretty clearly. And yet, her roaming through all these different experiences, these different traditions, have really, lit up where she is now. I don't get that she said, I did this and then I threw it away, and I did this and I threw it away. She's really looking at the whole picture and staying open to continue to step in time after time. Just noticing inside, there's something else. I'm just wondering more. Just yes and. Paniwadi used to joke with me, sometimes pick on me, because I would say, instead of yes, but with her, I would say yes, and then she'd look at me and then laugh. Yes, and. Can you, Sue? Sure.
I had already been introduced to the esoteric Dharma when I met my true Buddha master, His Holiness Dorji Chang Buddha III. I knew enough about the esoteric tradition that I knew I had finally found the perfect guru who could answer all my questions, even though I did not at first know his true identity. At that time, he was known to be a Dharma king by the name of Master Wan Koyi. All I knew was that my ultimate Buddha master could communicate directly with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and had the full power of the true Buddha Dharma, just like Shakyamuni Buddha. I had the extremely good fortune to train intensely and directly with the Buddha master and receive many initiations and empowerments from the Buddha. At various times in my practice, I was even able to stay and travel with the Buddha and his family. At one point in my training, I was able to ask my guru anything, and he was always able to give me a satisfactory answer. I remember that at one time, I had a list of almost 600 questions. Continue.
There's a lot of questions. Keep going.
Sure. I lived for many years with great Rinpoche, Aku Lamo, who came from Tibet. Then Aku Lamo is a very kind and compassionate, and her state of realization is very high. Aku Lamo spent most of her time in the hermitage that we shared practicing Dharma. I am sure that she is still like that. She is the most remarkable, and her accomplishments in the Dharma are very great. I am convinced, although she fiercely denies it, that she is a great bodhisattva. Her supernormal powers are also very great. Although she was mostly able to conceal her abilities, every so often she would do something amazing or know something that was about to happen. That could only have been the case if she had supernormal powers. I can still see her lifting the 2-ton pool of water in the ultimate bathing, the Buddha ceremony held in 2004. And more recently, I watched her body temperature soar to over 140 degrees Fahrenheit when she practiced Tummo. I was very fortunate to have been able to spend so much time with her. I will describe these events in more detail later.
Keep going.
We were both sent to study with His Holiness Dorji Chang, Buddha III, so that we might learn the highest Dharma. It was on my way to study with the Buddha that I encountered the magnificent Buddha light shown here in figure 8. On looking closely at the photo I took of that Buddha light, you can see the Buddha sitting in the bright red robe. There were other auspicious signs in the sky that day. A bright rainbow cloud appeared early in the morning, and Sanskrit seed syllables appeared in the sky with the rainbow. Sure enough, these were but portents of things to come. The next day, there was a very special ceremony in which I encountered my first red holy Vajra pill. At that time, several pills were placed in my hand. A certain Dharma was performed, and one of them flew out of my hand to a holy land in a flash, a brightly colored red light. It was incredible. I have since learned exactly where that holy pill went and understand the prophecy that was made at that time. Since then, I have had many encounters with these magical holy pills.
I'm aware of the time, and typically when I'm sitting here, I like to take some time to really generate our own experiences, and I wanted to just kind of get a full picture of the reading of this first chapter. How did I get here? And I'm going to encourage all of us to step away from this morning's class or this afternoon's class to really nurture that. How did I get here? Really check in with all the parts and parcels of my journey. How did I get here? And don't stay stuck on that. That was good. That was bad. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Oh, I'm happy I did this. But just notice that, oh, there was that. And what did I get from that? But just spend some time with it. It's really informative. It really can inform where we are today and where we're going. I would like to end with the last chapter I'll read. I not only found answers to my earlier questions, but being a Rinpoche, which she describes being a Rinpoche, becoming a Rinpoche through Buddha Master. But being a Rinpoche, I know that I need to benefit all living beings, friends and foes alike, with the Dharma I've learned and received. My job is to benefit living beings and propagate the true Dharma, which I have devoted my life to doing. I dedicate any merit accrued from my publishing this book to living beings everywhere so that they may quickly gain enlightenment. So we go on to chapter 2 saying, thus have I seen. And there are more experiences that she shares and more learning that she shares as a result of that. So I encourage you to continue to read. Notice what comes up for you as you read it. Notice where it touches you. Notice how that might compare with some of the experiences you have. No grasping, just holding. May the merit of our practice today be a blessing to all beings in all the realms. May those who are hungry and of need of shelter be given that of which they can thrive in. May we provide blessings to those who are in war zones, the Ukraine families, those working towards peace. And may the light of our true Dharma be a blessing to all of us. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.